When it comes to failed empires, the Roman Empire is probably the most famous example. And studying the fall of the Roman Empire is extremely fascinating, especially when you see parallels in the modern day. What is really fascinating about the collapse of the Roman Empire is that when you look back at it, while it seems obvious what was going on in hindsight, to the average Roman actually living through that experience, the inevitable collapse didn't seem and didn't feel obvious at all. And in fact, as Rome got closer and closer to its collapse, it was actually the case that for many Roman citizens, life actually temporarily got better and better and better. To them, it seemed like prosperity was high and that things were going really well. But their artificial prosperity was actually a symptom of the coming collapse. And it's the same thing in Russia today. In the case of Rome, the reason that life felt better to many, even as the empire came closer and closer to collapse, was that the empire decided to create an artificial sense of prosperity to distract people from how bad things really were. What ultimately led to the collapse of Rome was, of course, the fact that power was concentrated into the hands of too few people. Rome was a republic for a long time, but Rome eventually became an empire with a land-owning class and the rest of the population, or a large portion of the rest of the population, being slaves. You had the elite and you had the workers, and there really wasn't much in between. That created a lot of civil wars in Rome, and for a period, there was a coup in Rome practically every single decade. For the emperors of Rome, it became the case that it was no longer worthwhile for them to try to focus on keeping the empire together. Instead, all of their focus became on their own personal survival, political and otherwise. And so they realized that as everything was kind of crumbling around them, the best way to ensure their personal survival and their personal prosperity was to keep the people within the city of Rome happy. And so what they did as the empire continued to collapse was they began to ramp up the free things that the state of Rome gave to Roman citizens. Roman citizens became entitled to things like free wheat and free olive oil, many other things, as well as famously free entertainment. And for somebody living within the bubble of Rome, life felt very, very good. But the problem was these people were getting a lot of things that they did not have to work for, and other people were still having to produce those. And so the slaves in the other parts of the empire that were having to produce goods for the people in Rome to consume for free became even more agitated, and the civil wars ramped up even more. And so as the feeling of prosperity got higher in Rome, it eventually reached a breaking point, a tipping point, and the empire, as we know it, ceased to exist. Something very similar is happening in Russia right now, where if you go to Russia, and in particular, if you go to certain cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg, and you ask the average Russian citizen, how is the economy going right now? A lot of them will tell you, well, we actually think the economy is going quite well. There is, of course, a massive labor shortage in Russia, and so wages among Russian workers are higher than they are used to. People have more money than they are used to, and all other things being equal, despite the fact that Russia is involved in a very expensive war, many Russians feel exuberant about how things are going because they don't really understand the reality. Now, the reality, of course, is very simple, and you actually don't even need to know the precise numbers to know for a fact that things are moving in a certain direction that is the opposite of what many Russians may be perceiving. Because everybody knows that Russia has been at war for a period of over 3 years now, and that this war has been very costly, taking up a huge portion of Russia's GDP, an activity that is not generating anything in return. We also know that during this entire period of time, Russia has been hit by heavy sanctions on both imports and exports, where Russia has not been able to do the income-producing activities that it normally does, like selling oil and natural gas, at least not at the price and the scale that it's used to. It doesn't take a genius or a rocket scientist to realize that all of these things, a war and economic warfare going on at the same time, are not going to produce prosperity. They're going to lead actually in the opposite direction. So when we see Russians talking about how good things are going, our Roman Empire collapse censure should be coming up, and we should be asking what is actually going on. And in this case, we can actually track what is going on and measure the results and the progress. What is going on in Russia is very simple. Like the citizens of Rome, Russia has been working very hard to create an artificial sense of prosperity surrounding the war in Ukraine. And this is not an accident by any means, but it is actually a multi-decade plan and a multi-decade design. Russia didn't invade Ukraine overnight, of course. It was a multi-year process that started at least as early as the Russian annexation of Crimea in 2014, and likely even before that. And the Russian invasion and annexation of portions of Ukraine happened in stages that the Russian government was very prepared for, or at least they thought they were prepared for. The plan was that when they did their full-scale invasion of Ukraine about 3 years ago, that invasion would be over quickly, and that they would come out on top, basically controlling all of Ukrainian territory. But they knew that would still be expensive for them. Not as expensive as it has been, but they still knew it was going to be expensive. They also, at the same time, wanted the Russian people to think, hey, when our country goes to war, it's actually really good for us economically. And so to prepare for all of these outcomes, the cost of the war and the feeling of prosperity alongside it, Russia put themselves on a strict savings diet for several years to build up a sovereign wealth fund, basically a rainy day wealth fund that they could distribute into the Russian economy at a time correlated with their invasion of Ukraine. And the mechanism to distribute this money into the economy has been primarily through higher payments to soldiers, payments to the military-industrial complex, and death payments that have been doled out to Russian citizens. This is a fund that has become known as Putin's war chest. And the size of the fund is truly massive, especially by Russian standards. Approximately 640 billion US dollars equivalent, or equal to about 30%, about a third of Russia's entire national GDP. So the idea was, when we go to war, we are going to shift from this mode where we have been on a savings diet to a mode where we will very quickly not only stop saving, but we will also inject a lot of money into our economy all at once. On a personal finance level, this is sort of like if you have been saving your entire life to build up a retirement pension plan or a 401k. And so for your entire life, you have been investing, let's just say 15% of your income every paycheck into this fund. But then all at once, if you decided to cash in that entire amount, and not only do you stop having to save every paycheck, but now you have this lump sum cash payment. If you did something like that, you could create a sense of prosperity for yourself. You could probably go out, a lot of people, depending on where you're at, and buy yourself a luxury car. You could go on a lot of luxury vacations and things like that. However, there is a reason that most people don't just withdraw their retirement savings in this way. And that is because that money has to last you for a long time. And even though you can spend like a millionaire for a couple of years, when that money runs out, you're going to be in big trouble. That is sort of the situation that Russia is finding itself in now, where they have withdrawn their entire savings account. And by withdrawing that savings account, they have created a sense of temporary artificial prosperity in their economy. But the bill does come due. And in the case of Russia, it's pretty clear that bill is already coming due. And the main symptom is massive inflation. You see, the difference between a national government and a personal finance is that a national government can print money. So a national government is never technically going to run out of money. And so when a national government is running low on money, a big symptom of that is if inflation skyrockets, like what we are now seeing in Russia, which is a good indicator that Russia has reached the point where they have already drawn down as much as they can on their gigantic war chest that they built up prior to the war, and is now living on borrowed time where they have to keep printing money to keep their economy running. And it shows that while Russians right now might feel really good about their artificial prosperity, things over the next couple of decades are going to be really, really bad for them. Now, there is another aspect to all of this, which is very similar, but a little bit different, which is the labor shortage in Russia, which, like the war chest, temporarily is creating a feeling of prosperity among the average Russian worker, because they can go to any employer they want and get a raise basically whenever they want, because there are so few people in Russia right now and so many jobs that need to be done. This obviously feels like a great thing as a worker, but it comes with some problems when the reason for the labor shortage is artificial. And the reason for the labor shortage is obviously Russia's war against Ukraine, but not in the way that most people think. A lot of people think there's a labor shortage in Russia because all the young Russian men are being sent to the battlefield in Ukraine, and to be sure, that does account for a portion of the labor shortage. But it's actually probably not the biggest portion. Another large reason for the labor shortage is because of the military-industrial complex back home that has to support all those men that are going to the front line. And because the military-industrial complex basically has access to government funds that are being forced to be given to them by private banks, it's complicated, I have a whole video on it. Basically, these defense contractors have unlimited money, and they will pay workers whatever they have to pay to fill the demand and make sure that the equipment goes out, and even then they often can't do it. What that does, of course, is it drives wages up to a level that private sector employers cannot afford to pay and turn a profit. And that creates a problem where once the war is over, a lot of these private sector employers will have gone out of business. Once the defense sector shuts down, there will no longer be employment for those people there, but the companies that they used to work for, a lot of those companies will be gone. But there's another aspect of the labor shortage that also makes this even worse again. Because another reason for the labor shortage is indirectly related to the war, and it has to do with the high military salaries and the high death payments, the death benefits that are being given to the families of Russian soldiers who have fallen. Even though Russia delays these benefits, they're now at the point where a lot of them have come into the economy. And the problem with this is that these military payments, and in particular these death benefits, are wages that are so much higher than the average Russian is used to, and they really don't know what to do with all that money. But there's one thing that they definitely don't want to do, and that is work if they don't have to. What you see in a lot of small towns in Russia is kind of like a little economic boom, where people are wanting to spend this money on goods and services, and there's examples of people walking down the street in fur coats and eating at expensive restaurants every day because they don't know how to manage this kind of money. That creates a labor shortage because it creates demand for services at the same time that the employees that would normally work and fulfill that demand are being drawn to the defense sector in Russia. And so there's a huge problem, and all of this prosperity has a floor beneath it that is paper thin. You take out one piece here or one piece there, and it all collapses. So why would Russia pursue all of this when the end result is so obvious and so predictable? Well, again, you have to go back to the example of the Roman Empire. When the Roman emperors started giving free stuff to the citizens of Rome, at that point, they had abandoned any ideas about the Roman Empire staying together. They were just trying to protect their own regime and their own ability to stay in power. And I think that's what we're seeing going on with so many things in Russia right now. Putin is keeping this war going, even though it's bad for Russia, because for him personally, it is key to his survival. Putin is destroying the Russian economy, even though it's bad for Russia, because for him, it's good for his personal survival. And Putin is quite an old man, and so he doesn't have to get things to last that long. He just wants them to last as long as he is alive. So what does the future of Russia hold? Well, we don't know exactly, but we know that whatever happens, it's not going to be good. The Russian people are not on a path to prosperity right now because it's obvious, common sense, you cannot generate prosperity by spending all of your income on war, by spending all of your income on trying to keep your people happy in a way that is undermining the actual profit-generating businesses with inflation from the government. Russia is moving quickly towards a point where they are going to be very similar to what they were in the Soviet Union, where people's only way to get money is to go to the state. But when the state has no foundation to actually create incomes for these people, that is when you will see bad things happen. That's when you will see economic collapse. And by the way, in Russia's history, when Russia was still part of the Soviet Union, that exact thing has already happened when the Soviet Union defaulted on its debts and could no longer pay its bills. Russia's future does not look good, and all of these things I've said in this video and more are an example of why it's important to think critically about things and to not just take people's word for it or to be satisfied with surface level narratives. Because a surface level narrative would tell you that Russia has never been better and maybe we should stop engaging in war with them because it's an unwinnable war. But an actual analysis of the facts shows that the better that Russia looks, like Rome, it actually shows that they are accelerating the path towards their own collapse. Now, if you appreciated that analysis, if you appreciated this video, before you go, can I ask you for a quick favor? The reason that I'm able to bring out insights that you don't hear really anywhere else is because I am an independent analyst and I don't draw my salary from a newspaper or any other organization, and that gives me a lot of freedom of thought and allows me to produce videos like this. So if you appreciate that approach and the unique insights that I can bring, would you consider becoming a patron of this channel? It's completely voluntary. It's just a way for people who want to support this to have a path to do so. So if you want to learn more, just scan the QR code on screen or follow the link in the description of this video. With that said, it's getting dark outside, so I better close. See you guys on the next one.